Please do grab a seat. I reckon for many of us, some of our most kind of powerful memories will be in this whole area of friendship, won't they? Maybe for good or for bad, actually. Maybe you've got a kind of a painful memory where a friendship has broken down. Maybe you've had that experience, I hope it wasn't just me, of you're at school and you go into the cafeteria and you get your tray of food and you look around and every table is full. And everyone's in wonderful conversation and you've got nobody to sit with, and so you have to go and sit on your own. And those sorts of things can stick with you, can't they? On the flip side, I guess some of you will have just some of your most kind of wonderful memories will be linked to friendships. Maybe you've got a memory of a particularly close friend and a time you spent together, or maybe it's a group of friends and together for a meal, laughing together, sharing memories. I think that's sort of the power of those memories tells us why this series is important. I think that the power of our kind of friendship memories tells us that actually this whole topic of kind of making friends and deepening friendships is actually really crucial. It's part of what we've been seeing. It kind of means actually to be human. It's part of what it means to be human. We're in week 4 of 6. We've been doing this series on the whole subject of friendship. And tonight we get to the topic of deepening friendships. And I'm going to get there. But I just want to give us a little recap, a little reminder of some of the things we've thought about so far. So you may remember that we said right at the beginning, if we look at the start of the Bible, at the very opening pages, Genesis 1 and 2, tell us that we were made for relationships, human relationships. God said when he made Adam, he said, it's not good for the man to be alone. In other words, we were made to be relational beings. We were made to have friendships. It's actually part of what it means for us to thrive and flourish as humans, is to have meaningful and significant relationships and friendships in our lives. It's part of what we're designed for. But you remember from Genesis 3, when human beings decided they wanted to rebel against God and go their own way, everything kind of got tainted, actually including relationships and friendships. And now, rather than being straightforward and easy, they too were going to be difficult. They were going to be hard. They were going to be affected by this kind of human turning in on ourselves in what the Bible calls our sin. So we're made for relationships, but now those relationships this side of heaven are going to be hard and are not always going to be straightforward. We also said we need to be just incredibly conscious, don't we, of just our own personalities. We can't have this sort of cookie-cutter mold of friendship where we sort of say, look, this is how you do it, and here's your 3-step plan, and this is what it means to be a friend or have friends. Actually, we're all so different. We're different in terms of our personalities. We're different in our temperaments. We're different in our circumstances and our capacities. We're different in our seasons of life. And Ray helped us think last week, didn't he? That's moving all the time. And so we just need to be aware of that and not be sort of overly prescriptive on one another as to what friendship might sort of mean or look like in just very different lives. We've been reminded as well, John helped us to see this, that actually when we think about this topic of friendship, we've got to keep looking away from ourselves. Our temptation is to keep thinking, well, why aren't other people better friends to me? And why can't I get what I need from other people? And John reminded us, no, actually, this whole thing is really about how can I be a good friend? How can I look away from me and serve others? And ultimately look away from me and look to Jesus, because he is the ultimate. The Bible describes him as the friend of sinners. The friend who perfectly meets all of our deepest needs. So we keep looking to him. And as we thought about last week, actually all of this is also bound up with mission. We might not have thought so. That might not have been the first thought as we think about friendship. But remember what Jesus said to his followers, his first followers, in John 13:35. He said this, by this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. In other words, there's a missional impact to the way in which we treat each other, serve each other, relate to one another, and have friendship among us. That should say something about our God, the one who's poured his love into our hearts and now it overflows to others. So that's the recap. That's sort of where we've got to. And tonight we're thinking about this whole topic of how do we deepen friendships? Perhaps one of the things in a couple of parts. The first one more briefly. And I just want to remind you of this diagram that John showed us a few weeks ago. This is a diagram done by a sociologist, a man called Robin Dunbar. And he had these circles just demonstrating actually how different friendships kind of work, really. So if you can see this, I hope you can see this. Sort of at the very outer edge is sort of known names, and then you move into acquaintances, and then you move into friendship, good friends, best friends, close friends. And at each stage, he says, look, at those different levels, you'll be able to have a different number. So you can probably have lots and lots and lots of acquaintances, lots and lots of people who you know their names, but actually, you might have just a very few who you'd call close friends or best friends, just because the amount of kind of time and energy that maintaining those sorts of friendships requires of us. And it's worth saying, isn't it, that some transitions, in terms of thinking about deepening friendships, some transitions are going to be easier than others, aren't they? So it's quite easy, I think, to go from a known name to an acquaintance. It's quite easy to go from an acquaintance to a friend. You can do that quickly with relatively little effort, I think. I'm going to give you some ideas in a minute how to do that. I think this next thing we're going to talk second, take a bit longer. I think it takes much longer, and it's more difficult, I think, over time to go from being good friends to best friends. That just takes time. Naturally, that just takes a while. You can't kind of force that. You can't. There's no kind of magic recipe to get you there. That's time with people, isn't it? But we'll talk about how some of those things might be deepened. So think about the first one then. How can you move, if you want to deepen some friendships, how can you move from acquaintance to friend? How do you move, if you, in your workplaces, the school gate, with families, with colleagues, in church, how do you go from, well, there's a whole load of people I know and I know some of their names. Well, how can they sort of move to be someone you'd say, well, they're my friends? Just some very simple, practical ideas. None of this is rocket science. It may be blindingly obvious to you, but here it is. Simple things like maybe just kindness shown to neighbours or to colleagues. It could be as simple as putting your neighbours' bins out or pulling them in. It could be feeding their cats when they're away, even though you hate cats. It could be you're the one that does the coffee run or the lunch run, couldn't it? And if you do that for your neighbours or your colleagues over time, they go from being an acquaintance to being a friend. Or maybe you could volunteer in the community or join a community group. So what are some of the needs in your community? Maybe it is joining the school PTA or the governors. Maybe it's becoming a trustee of a local charity. Maybe it's kind of joining a sports club, joining your local table tennis club or netball club. And as you just spend time with people, they'll become your friends, won't they? You'll grow friendships and you'll deepen them. It could be hospitality, couldn't it? Maybe a practical thing for you is you say, look, once a month, we're going to get our diary out. We'll put a kind of a red ring around the date on a Friday night or a Saturday night or a Sunday lunch, and we'll say we'll try and get some people in. Maybe people we don't know super well, but we'll get them into our home. We'll spend time together over food. Friendships develop. It may be very practical care, taking a meal for someone who's just come out of hospital. Maybe doing their washing. Maybe giving someone a lift somewhere who needs it. It's a simple way, isn't it, that acquaintances become friends. In terms of a church context, well, this is why we say things like joining home groups and teams are important. Actually, if you join a home group and you start sharing about what's going on in your life and you're praying for one another, well, pretty quickly, those people they're not just going to be acquaintances. You're going to say, actually, these are my friends. Or on a service team, you're working together, aren't you, side by side, working at something together. Friends. If you haven't got a team, easily here, the easiest team to join here is probably the setup team. We've got 4 different setup teams. They help put stuff out in a morning. They put stuff away in an evening. You're on the same team. You'll just make some friends as you do that. It's kind of simple stuff, isn't it? But it's just that from that very surface level acquaintance, how can you get a bit deeper than that? Well, there's just a few ideas for you. Secondly, though, how do we move from friends to good friends or close friends. If we just pull the circles back up, if the first point is really thinking about how do you get from the outer circles just sort of in one, well, then we're saying, well, how do you go from friends to being good friends, best friends, even your closest friends? How do you do that? Well, again, I think that's harder. I think that takes much more time. Sometimes those things are going to be around sort of things like shared interests or even shared experience, things that we go through with others that actually serve to deepen a friendship. And I want to give you just one suggestion, really, just one idea on how you might just take a friendship toward a good friendship, toward a deeper friendship. I'll give it to you, I'll explain it, and then I'll just kind of give some caution around it, because I don't think this is entirely straightforward. A lot of this is really in the realm of wisdom, rather than sort of thou must do X, Y, or Z. And my one suggestion is this: if I could sum it up in one word, it would be the word vulnerability. Vulnerability. If you want to deepen a friendship, think about vulnerability. Think about how can I be just a little bit more vulnerable, a little bit more open and honest. Not with everyone, but maybe with a few trusted people. I think vulnerability is a bit of a countercultural quality. Certainly if you're sort of raised in sort of a British culture, where we're taught somewhat, aren't we, to have a slightly stiff upper lip, to not be emotional. Big boys don't cry, and all that sort of guff, and so we're not. I don't think we're very good at vulnerability. Let me say what it's not. It's not. Vulnerability is not sort of wearing your heart on your sleeve at all times, in all places, with all people. I don't mean that. It's not sort of the absence of any boundaries. Vulnerability doesn't mean, well, we've got no boundaries now between us, and you can ask me anything, and I can ask you anything, and we must demand absolute transparency of one another, full disclosure. It's not. I don't mean that by vulnerability. And it's not weakness. We tend to think vulnerability is weakness. I don't think it is, actually. In some ways, vulnerability is the flip side of courage. Because anytime you're required to exercise some courage, there's a sort of a risk you're taking on, isn't there? You're opening yourself up, maybe to some sort of loss. That's really what vulnerability is. It's opening oneself up to another in an act of sort of honesty and trust that what you've shared isn't going to be used against you or to hurt you. One writer on vulnerability, a lady called Brené Brown, said this of vulnerability. Vulnerability can often be the birthplace of deeper connection. When we're vulnerable with someone, when we share something of ourselves with someone, that can often be the starting point of a friendship going just one step deeper. I love this quote from Rob Parsons. He says this, and I think it's a simple quote, but I think it's quite insightful. He says this: you tell acquaintances about your success, you tell your friends about your fears. Have you got anyone that you tell your fears to? Now, maybe if you're married, that's primarily your spouse, but is there anyone else? It's quite easy to talk about success, isn't it? We meet people and how's it going? Yeah, it's fine. It's going great. You know, things are good. But who do you tell your fears to? Who do you say, actually, here's what I'm kind of worried about. One of my closest friends who I trained at theological college with, and is still probably one of my closest friends in ministry now, we met over 20 years ago. And after we'd known each other not that long, he said, can we meet up? I'd love to talk about something. And he came and he opened up about something in his life that he wanted a bit of, to talk through and pray about. And I was raised in one of those stiff upper lip kind of households. It was a bit strange to me, but it was the birthplace of deeper connection. It taught me something, and as we grew in friends, it's his act of vulnerability started something that now, 20 years later, is a very close friendship. It's not easy, but it is important, isn't it? Drew Hunter's written a little book on friendship. John was kind enough to lend it to me. And he has this little equation to think about this. He says this, honesty plus acceptance equals deepening friendship. Honesty plus acceptance equals deepening friendship. When I'm truly honest about my fears, how I'm feeling, what's going on, when I'm honest with you, and when I meet acceptance, then a bond kind of forms, doesn't it? A trust bond, which leads to this deepening friendship. Not something you can do easily or quickly, not something you do with everyone, but do you have anyone? You might think this evening, look, this is all very well, Martin, but is this just sort of 21st century sort of feel-good psychobabble? Is there anything biblical in all this? Well, I think we do see examples of this sort of vulnerability in the Bible. I think if you look at some of the friendships, you think about a sort of a Jonathan and a David. And when David has to flee King Saul, we see them. There's moments of real vulnerability as Jonathan and David, they weep together. You think of Paul and the Ephesian elders in Acts chapter 20 as he has to say his goodbye to them because he'll never see them. You see them, they kneel. And Paul shares deeply from his heart and they pray and they weep together. There's a real vulnerability. You think of Jesus and his disciples. Maybe on that last night in the Garden of Gethsemane, you see Jesus himself actually modeling a certain sort of vulnerability as he asks them to watch and to pray with him, as he bows down and sweats drops of blood and he weeps for what lies ahead. I think you can see lots of examples in the Bible of this sort of thing. So we perhaps might have to say, actually, if we have that stiff upper lip culture, the problem's really with our culture. And perhaps we need to work out, well, how do I learn to be a little bit more honest, a little bit more open, a little bit more vulnerable with some trusted friends? This is where we get back to Proverbs. And if you've got Proverbs there, if you can see it, Proverbs 27, there's just a few verses particularly that I wanted to draw your attention to from that reading. And again, it's in this idea of just trying to deepen through sort of honesty and transparency. Proverbs 27, verse 6, if you can see that, says this, look, wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses. Wounds from a friend. Wounds are never pleasant, but there's a sort of wounding which the author of Proverbs says actually it's a good thing. It's something we need. It's something we need to give permission to others, not all, but some, to actually do for us. Wounds of real friends actually are good wounds that we need. And then in verse 9, we read this, perfume and incense bring joy to the heart, and the pleasantness of a friend springs from their heartfelt advice. Just as perfume and incense bring a certain sort of joy, well, so too the advice of a friend that springs from a heart. They're not sort of sugarcoating it. They're not telling you what you want to hear, but that heartfelt advice that comes from a deep friend, a true friend, is a good thing. And in the middle of those verses, there's a bit of imagery used, isn't there, which I think ties into this. Verse 7, one who is full loathes honey from the comb, but to the hungry even what is bitter tastes sweet. In other words, if you've got this desire and this hunger for the friend that brings you even wounding advice, well, it will feel sweet. If you think you don't need it, well, you'll be like the person who just feels full, feels it's unnecessary. But verse 8, like a bird that flees its nest is anyone who flees from home. The person who flees the heartfelt advice, the trusted wisdom of a friend, it's like the bird that leaves its nest. It might seem easy, but actually it's quite foolish, isn't it? The author of Proverbs is saying we need those deepening friendships. We need perhaps, again, in just those two or three people who we begin to develop these with, we need to sort of give them permission for candor. I've got a friend who does this for me, and very kindly they asked that they'd spotted something in my life that needed addressing, and they spoke to me about it, and they said, look, can I speak to you about these things? If and when I see them, do you mind me? And And as painful as it was, everything in me wanted to say, no, you can't say those things. Go away, shut up. I never want to see you again. Something in me, God's grace enabled me to say, actually, yeah. I would appreciate if you see things that you don't think are quite right, I would value you coming to me and telling me. Gordon MacDonald, a Christian leader who's now into his 80s, has this great line where he says, we often think, don't we, what we want in a deep friend, those deeper friendships, is we want that person with whom I can really be myself. I need the friend I can really be myself. And Gordon MacDonald says, actually, you need a friend that helps you to be better than yourself. You need a friend, don't you? They can see you being yourself, but actually they're such a good friend that they'll say, actually, I think here's some stuff that might need to change. Here's some stuff you might need to think about. So actually, you're not just being yourself, they help you be better. They help you to grow. If you want to be that sort of friend, I would very simply suggest be a good listener. Unlike Job's friends. Do you remember Job's friends? They had a lot to say. In fact, most of the book of Job is Job's friends giving him a theological lecture in the midst of his pain and suffering. So he's going through it, and his friends come with all this kind of theological and philosophical rationale for what's happening. And at the very end of the book, God says to Eliphaz, one of the friends, I'm angry with you and your two friends because you've not spoken the truth about me. Now, good friends listen. Good friends will advise, but good friends will listen. Now, let me give you some caution on this. Choose wisely who you want to be vulnerable with, who you might want to try and deepen a friendship with, because trust is absolutely critical, isn't it, to this sort of a relationship. And consider carefully what you're sharing and with whom. Part of this is as you have this sort of honesty, transparency, vulnerability, think carefully about how you steward the sacred trust which is given to you. If that information is shared, do you have permission to share it with others? Or actually, do you need to keep it to yourself? Sometimes people share things with me, they assume I've told Sarah. Actually, I never do unless someone's given me permission. If I've said, do you mind if I share it? Or they've said, please share it. Otherwise, I don't. I take it I don't have permission to share unless someone's granted it. If I'm sharing information about a situation that involves others, do I have that permission to share it? Should I be sharing it? Be very careful about gossip. If you want to have very few deep friends, then start gossiping. If people start sharing things with you, if you share something with somebody and then it gets around 6 other people, well, you probably won't do it again, will you? You probably won't share with that person again if they're a gossip. And beware of that instinct within all of us, I think, to want to know, perhaps more than we need to know. Sometimes we have that thing, don't we? We're really close friends. You tell me everything. Now, why do I really want to know? Is it ultimately just because I'm a bit of a nosy Parker? I just like knowing all the gory details of people's hurts. Got to be very careful, haven't we, on that, sort of knowing ourselves. I want to say I don't think, as you deepen friendships, I don't think no one can demand that you share everything with them. Even if your friend thinks they have a right to know, or even if they really want to know, I don't think that gives them a right to know. We need to respect one another's boundaries. We'll all have different boundaries here. And we really need to work hard at respecting those. We need to appreciate we're all different. We will have sort of varying degrees of comfort with all this. Some of you will feel this will come very easily. You'll have quite a number of quite close friendships. You find it very easy to open up, to just pour out what's in your heart, and to be vulnerable. It's just natural. It's just easy for you. Others of us will find this very difficult. We might have lived 6 or 7 decades not doing this. This will be very hard to suddenly say to somebody, hey, can we meet up? I'd just love to share something. Maybe, can we meet up? I'd love to talk and pray about something. That's going to be very difficult. We need to give each other plenty of space, plenty of room, plenty of understanding as we try and sort of work this stuff out. Don't play comparison games. Don't beat yourself up if you struggle with this. Keep looking to Jesus as the friend and keep seeking to serve others. But do think about this. Do think about how you can press. And if you're sat here this evening, you think, do you know, I'm not sure I've got anybody, maybe outside of my spouse, who I could not just share my successes, but share my fears. Then I really do think it's just worth thinking. Find some time to think, well, could there be somebody? Is there somebody that I could, try and just be a little bit more vulnerable with, to open up with, to see if a friendship can go deeper? Final thing I want to say this evening as we finish, and this is perhaps the most difficult. This is the one I feel most nervous about. This is the one I feel this is all in the realm of what seems wise to me, I think. And that's really the whole area of friendships between men and women. That feels like quite a complicated issue, doesn't it? Partly because of different circumstances and different stages of life. I mean, there's a friendship, isn't there, between a man and a woman when you're both single, and maybe the development of that friendship is going somewhere towards actually the most intimate sort of friendship. It's different, isn't it? If you're maybe at the end of life and you strike up a friendship with somebody, that feels slightly different again. Perhaps the most difficult area is that whole area of if you're married or in a serious relationship with somebody, and then friendship with somebody who of the opposite sex who you might be attracted to. That feels like it needs a ton of wisdom. Now, I want to give you a Bible verse, because in this Bible verse, I think Paul treads this line. He exposes both ends, both extremes on this issue, really. Here's the verse. This is Paul saying to a young pastor called Timothy, and he says this: Timothy, treat older women as mothers and younger women as sisters with absolute purity. Notice the two extremes he's avoiding. On the one hand, he's avoiding the sort of mentality that is around, particularly in perhaps more sort of strict or conservative church world, that says really men should never speak to women and women should never speak to men. You can nod on the way into church, but don't have any more interaction than that, because it's terribly dangerous. You might be tempted. You might cross a moral boundary somewhere. So really you can't have any meaningful friendship. Well, Paul says, no, treat older women as mothers and younger women as sisters. It seems to me like and I know all families are different. Not all family relationships are brilliant, but a healthy family relationship, you say, well, the relationship you have with your parents, the relationship you have with your siblings is more than just one of acquaintance, isn't it? You wouldn't view your sister as merely an acquaintance. You say, no, there's a friendship there. There's a real relationship there. Paul appeals to that kind of family model to say we ought to be able to view each other like that. We should be able to treat each other as brothers and sisters. Some of us will be like our spiritual parents or aunties and uncles. We should be able to do that. But notice at the other end of the extreme, Paul notes this. The other end of the extreme is a sort of mindset that says, look, Martin, stop being so kind of tightly wound about some of these things. Stop being so kind of prudish. Just men and women, of course, they can be best of friends. And why does kind of all this kind of moral lines have to get in the way? Just stop being weird about it. Of course, men and women can be best mates, and there's absolutely no problem there. Well, Paul says, Timothy, I want you to treat the women as sisters, but with absolute purity. Because, Timothy, we kind of know all too well, don't we? We know what's in the human heart. We know the stories of human history. We know that, sadly, purity isn't always observed. Unless purity is absolutely deliberately pursued and fought for, sadly, things go wrong. Maybe you've experienced that. Maybe you know something of that. And so I think we need to try and just hold this tension, don't we? Between saying, yes, Paul says that family friendship that we want to enjoy, that's good. We ought to enjoy that. We should enjoy friendship. But we've got to think about purity. Paul is saying, don't be naive. Don't be naive about your own heart. Don't be naive about your own temptations. Don't be naive about perhaps the particular patterns of thought which you maybe particularly struggle with. Don't be naive about how the devil works to tempt us. Don't do that kind of, and it is naive, it's foolish to think it could never happen to me. It could never happen. I would never ever cross any of those sort of lines of moral appropriateness in relationships with the other sex. It could never happen to me. No one goes into these friendships thinking that's where they want it to end, and yet it does sometimes. Don't be naive. We need to be incredibly wise. And so I want to avoid the temptation to be overly prescriptive. But let me give you a few thoughts. It strikes me that where these friendships are concerned between people who may be attracted, it's always easier, isn't it, in groups of friends? It's always easier if you're a single person and you're friends with a husband and a wife. Or if you're a husband and a wife, you're friends with another couple. That seems much easier, doesn't it? I think the real danger point or temptation point is that I'll spend time one-to-one in a close friendship with somebody who I might be attracted to. That's where we've got to be so careful. We've got friends from our college days, Phil and Katie. Sarah and I would say, Phil and Katie are our friends. Phil is my friend. Katie is my friend. But there is a difference there, isn't there? I think it's relatively common sense. You may disagree and want to talk to me afterwards about it. I would go for a drink on my own with Phil. I would not go for a drink on my own with Katie. Not because I kind of feel like that way necessarily about her, but I think it's confusing, potentially. I think it might cause consternation to onlookers. It might cause consternation to my friend Phil. And as that relationship deepens, emotional intimacy can quickly become attraction. That's why I think we just need real wisdom and real care. We need to know ourselves. We need to be honest with ourselves. None of this is easy. We live in a sin-stricken world. But I think, if anything, I'd probably say err on the side of caution. Err on the side of caution. Leave no room for reproach and no room for misunderstanding. Now, you may think I'm being far too cautious on this issue. Maybe I am. The only thing I would say is I've worked in churches now for just over 20 years. I think if you asked anybody, any pastor who had worked in churches for a similar period, seen the things we've seen, heard the things we've heard, read the things we've read, I think we would just say, this does just seem like sort of wisdom. This does seem common sense. You may think I'm pushing it too far, but it seems wise to me. Now, you may want to talk more about that. You may feel like, no, actually, I really strongly disagree. If you want to, I'm very glad to talk about any of those things, aware that what I'm putting forward is sort of, here's my best case of wisdom as I see it, but I might not be getting it right all the time. Let me conclude with in kind of summary. Here's the big take-home I want you to get, is that a wise but deliberate vulnerability is one of the ways in which we can slowly but surely deepen our existing friendships. I will plead with us as a church that our culture does not become one of sort of the stiff upper lip, the acquaintances who nod at one another over coffee and don't ever get any deeper than that. Our own spiritual well-being, and actually the spiritual well-being of one another, depends on us truly loving one another deeply as friends. And as we thought about at the beginning, as Ray reminded us last week, our mission to make Jesus known depends on this being part of the cultural fabric of our church. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. Can I pray as we finish, and then Gav will lead us toward a conclusion. Our Father in heaven, we thank you and praise you for our Lord Jesus, the friend of sinners, the one who draws near to us, who never leaves us nor forsakes us, the one who brings us deepest joy, fullness of life, as we were thinking about this morning, both now and evermore. Help us to keep looking to him And help us to look to one another. Father, help us, maybe if we're not good at vulnerability, maybe if that doesn't come easily or naturally, would you help us by your Spirit to maybe think of one or two others with whom we could just begin to deepen a friendship, knowing that actually it's for our good, we were designed that way, and know that it speaks of something of you to those around us. Father, help us in all these things. We're aware of our own weaknesses. We're aware of just circumstances and sometimes relational struggle. Forgive us where we fail, but help us by your Spirit to amend what we are for our own good, for the good of others, for the good of the world, but ultimately for your glory. Amen.